Welcome fans, this is Isha Mohan from Bibliomaniac Cinephile, a channel where we try to do justice to you binge watchers by delineating every single aspect and trying to give an insight of a show, of a movie or a series or anything that makes it the big screen out there. And today we're going to be specifically talking about the show, a British show, Fleabag. Fleabag is a show that was written by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and she's the creator of the show. And the very first thing that I have to commend her for is the fact that she's not an actress. She's just a person who's in the comic industry, who's a comedian in the UK circuit, and who mainly does these one man stage plays or satirical comedy or cringe comedies on stages. And she's a person who writes for shows, who's a writer, who's a writer who works on screenplays or scripts or etc., whatever that is. But she has never acted before, and this is the very first time she made a debut. And the fact that she was able to break the fourth wall of acting and trying to connect to the audience by giving these tiny nuances and idiosyncrasies after every single dialogue or every other significant movement that happened on the screen was the most amazing thing about this show. Now, before we jump on to any particular aspect, or before we before we start ghettoing anything or subsecting anything, I want to say that Fleabag, like any other British show, was phenomenal and a class act. Because recently, whenever I've watched a British show or an English show in particular, as opposed to an American show, by English show I mean a British show, they have always preferred quality over quantity. And you can see how small or how brief British shows are, as the number of episodes or maybe even the run through time of a particular episode is way lesser than that of an American show. But their quality for sure transcends or outdoes, outdoes every other American show to have ever existed. And no offense, but this is just a plain fact or something that I have noticed. Maybe this is just my personal opinion, but I have seen a lot of people agreeing with me for this. Now, Amazon has lately been really consistent with their originals and has been producing content as good as Netflix, or maybe even better. Like for example, they had a show named Hunter. But Fleabag was probably the very first Amazon original that I watched, and I wasn't disappointed even a bit. When I first saw the very first episode, I was kind of skeptical about moving forward with this, because I mean I'm not a person who enjoys cringe comedy much. But as I moved forward, I got hooked onto it, and I just couldn't uh, get off the cuffs, because it was just so. I mean, for starters, Phoebe Waller-Bridge's writing has to be one of the greatest, and that's the reason she's so famous for that particular thing. But the very fact that she pulled off a performance like that, I don't think if anyone would be disappointed after watching the show. And after watching the show, I think this is just my opinion, or maybe a lot of people would agree with me, but Fleabag, to perform like what Phoebe Waller-Bridge did as Fleabag, as we do not know her name. They never reveal her name. We never learn her name. We just know that the character's name is Fleabag. I might be wrong, but it is a character which can only be played when you have written it from your own perspective. Because, like I said, she breaks the fourth wall of acting, or the fourth dimension of acting. She violates the laws of acting in general, right? She kind of looks at the camera for a second and gives us a tiny look, or maybe says something or explains the whole situation in a second or in a click. And that is something that I've maybe seen before, but not as or as well executed as this one. And apart from Phoebe Waller-Bridge's uh, performance, I have to applaud or commend Olivia Colman for her performance, because she is probably one of the best actresses out there right now who is existing. And she plays annoying mother in this show, and there are these frustrating conversations between Fleabag and Olivia Colman, which literally gets to us and shows how uncomfortable the whole situation is, because the show is so relatable and people can relate to this, is the reason why it makes it even more funny, because there are so many instances in our daily life that we come across and we actually don't pay heed to much, or maybe just brush it off. But Fleabag does not shy away from talking about it. Now, I've actually done. I wouldn't be doing justice if I don't mention this, but Fleabag is mainly. I didn't want to give a spoiler, but Fleabag. I'll just give you a gist of it. Fleabag is mainly a show about this woman, in London who's navigating a life through the city, and who has just been through a tragedy of losing a best friend, and who goes through a lot of problems such as financial crisis in her life, and a family being on a thin string like a cat, and not being close to her family, and a relationship being jeopardized with her sister and her sister's husband, and many such things which are practically possible in everybody's daily life. And she portrays it. Phoebe Waller-Bridge portrays this whole show in a way that it's funny, and at the same time tells us that it talks about an issue which is way more important. And I think this is I don't want to sound political here, but I think this is the very first politically incorrect here, but I think this is the very first women show that I felt that they weren't portraying toxic feminism, because there are often shows in which, in the name of women empowerment, or movies where they just don't pay attention to the quality of the screenplay, or maybe even don't portray feminism in the very right way or in the right manner. I'm not saying that Fleabag talks about feminism, but because it focuses on this one woman who is navigating her life through a metropolitan city, it clearly comes across a lot of aspects that a girl would, or a woman would, face in her daily life. And the show kind of handled it in a very responsible way, and at the same time made it funny and satirical. So that's what I wanted to say. That's what I meant to say, and this is what I wanted to convey, mainly when I brought about the topic of feminism. But apart from these two, I think Andrew Scott was someone who's a standout, and he created this Horn Storm after the second season, as he was the hot priest. And now that I've mentioned about Andrew Scott, I have to say this: the first season is mainly about Fleabag herself and her life and her struggles with her family and in her career and stuff like that. But in the second season, it's mainly about Andrew Scott. It's centered around Andrew Scott, who's the love interest of Fleabag, and because he's a priest, he cannot afford to have a momentary dalliance or a romantic relationship with Fleabag. On the contrary, Fleabag, according to her, in her words, she has sinned a lot in her life, as she has indulged in a lot of philandering, I would say. I think if that would be the right word to use, correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, but just don't butcher me. But yeah, and I love how the confessional scene was played out in the second season, the Neil scene, as Andrew Scott was never shown in the scene actually, but Fleabag was confessing the whole time, and that performance by Fleabag, and the fact that we could hear Andrew Scott's voice all the time and still feel the presence of him being there and yet not being shown on the camera, was probably one of the best shot scenes of the whole series, and was probably one of the most defining moments of the whole series in the out of both of the seasons. And there is no one particular season that I would prefer over another, but it's definitely worth. I mean, definitely, I should be mentioning that both of them are interrelated, and there are aspects that do continue in the second season too. And I love how there was this. They show this relationship of Fleabag with her sister, and her sister's husband. And I love how Fleabag, despite being this annoying younger sister, ends up helping her elder sister every now and then, and in a very subtle way. And I love how they bring up the story around the statue or the sculpture, the tiny sculpture that she steals from her father's home. Revolves around every now and then, and it never actually stops. And they keep on shuttling back and forth with that particular aspect. I loved that part. And that's pretty much it. But before I end this video, I have to mention this. Phoebe Waller-Bridge did a few shows in London back in the day, around 2013 or something, I guess. The same name of the show, named Fleabag, and it was it got a tumultuous response by people of London, and was probably one of the most successful comic shows out there. And she based her character and the whole series on that particular show. And she toured for this particular gig that she did for Fleabag. And I have to say that it was probably the reasons why it inspired her to, convert it into a script and, enact the whole character in a form of a series. Now, if I have to rate it on a scale of 10, I would give this a solid 9, I would say. And this is the very first time I'm doing that, because that's how great it was, and that's how apt and apposite it was. And apart from that, I wouldn't beat about the bush. I would just simply say that it's worth a while. Just go and watch it. I mean, there's no point in waiting. Just go and watch it. Right? And if you like the video, like, share and subscribe, and do give your opinions in the comment section, and do give us any other suggestion of our further videos and further endeavors that we can maybe experiment with. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.